It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting through my website, emailrevealer.com. Or you could just email me at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. We have Stephen Marche today, stephenmarche.com. That's M-A-R-C-H-E. You can find him on Twitter at Stephen Marche. And the book is called, you know what, this is a great depressing topic, Stephen, thank you. The Next Civil War. Oh, man, this is just what I need. The Next Civil War, Dispatches from the American Future. Stephen Marche, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Pleasure to be with you.
So tell us about yourself. Who is Stephen Marche?
I'm a Toronto writer, novelist, and a columnist, and I've written for everyone. I'm a Canadian writer, but I've written mostly for American places, the New Yorker, the New York Times, the Atlantic, and so on. And my new book is called The Next Civil War, which, is kind of what it sounds like. It's like a description of how close the United States is to, civil strife and what that might look like. And it took me about 5 years to write.
Yeah, I know. I've been dreading this topic, to tell you the truth, because it's just so doom and gloom. But I noticed you wrote a bunch of books, and one of them is called How Shakespeare Changed Everything. What's that one about?
Well, I actually did my PhD in Shakespeare when I was a kid, like a million years ago. And that one's sort of about how Shakespeare actually affected history, which he did in a lot of weird ways. Like, the reason there are starlings in the United States is that there's the birds, like the little birds that go around eating cherry crops and so on, is that he mentioned starlings in a play, and this guy named Eugene Shifflin decided to release every bird mentioned in Shakespeare onto the continent of the United States, and one of them was starlings, and that's had a huge amount of agricultural destruction because of it. But so it's like little stories like that, like the assassination of Lincoln was, committed by one of the great Shakespearean actors. Like, one of the things people don't know about Booth is that he actually was a great Shakespearean actor who was in part inspired by having been in Julius Caesar 3 months before he killed Lincoln. So it's little bits like that. It's kind of like an amusing collection of anecdotes about how Shakespeare changed everything.
Now, is that the one we actually don't know who wrote all the Shakespeare plays? Like, it's a mystery?
Oh no, we know who wrote the Shakespeare plays. There's a big thing about the Shakespeare conspiracy theories in there, but there's Shakespeare definitely wrote the plays. There have been a lot of the Shakespeare author theory was really kind of like one of the first conspiracy theories, of them all, and it goes back to the middle of the 19th century. But no, there's it's pretty clear when you look at the historical evidence that Shakespeare wrote his plays. Okay, great. So there are lost plays and there are things like that, but and of course we don't, you don't know anything about people in the 17th century. We don't know when Shakespeare was born. We don't know when, we know the day he died, but we don't know the day he was born. We don't really know how he spelled his name because he signed it differently, 6 times. So people, the historical record of the 17th century is pretty vague, but that doesn't mean Shakespeare wasn't Shakespeare.
Okay, great. Yeah, exactly. Vaguely recall some kind of, like you said, conspiracy theory about Shakespeare there.
Yeah.
Okay, so now the book here, The Next Civil War, Dispatches from the American Future. What will we find in this book here, The Next Civil War, by Stephen Marche?
Well, what I tried to do in the book is get as close as I can to a description of what a future civil war in the United States might look like. And the way I did that was by, going across America, going all over the states and, places that a lot of East Coast East Coast and West Coast journalists don't go, like Oklahoma and rural Ohio, and talking to white power people and talking to, talking to various far-right factions. But then it's also like a lot of interviews with experts. So it's talking to a lot of the leading expert. Like I talked to the colonel who was responsible for drawing up battle plans for if there's an insurrection in the United States and what the military calls a full spectrum operation in the homeland would look like what military policy for battle plans are for taking back a county, say, that decided to go, decided to defy the federal government, as well as, experts on civil war, on hyperpartisanship, on the collapsing state of American institutions, on the environment, on like corn production in the United States. This is actually a hugely complicated issue. Vulnerability of cities to large scale flooding from climate change. So it's about 200 expert opinions, and basically it's like the best available models. But instead of just saying what they are, I kind of give pictures of what they look like, which are fiction, like they're imagined scenarios, but they're really as close as I could get to the models. They're not like everything in the book could be footnoted. So it's imagined scenarios, but they're pretty closely tied to to reality.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure these are the same type of war game scenarios. What do they call it? They don't call it war games anymore. They call it the exercises, right? Military exercises. Yeah. Right.
Well, military exercises tend to be recreating specific scenarios, right? I never got anywhere close to that. Like I got to that. I mean, those are classified, and no one would ever give me those. But I did get to people who were responsible for thinking through the legal ramifications of what it means to, conquer a county that has gone rogue, essentially, and is no longer law, which is very complicated in the United States, much more complicated than it would be in Canada or in Britain or really in any other democracy, because the United States doesn't really have a method for suspending habeas corpus and for Emergency Measures Act. It really has only a series of kind of overlapping police actions that it can do. So it gets pretty complicated pretty fast.
Well, let me ask you this, because it seems that they're like under Trump, and I hate to point fingers, but it does seem like under Trump,
sure.
There was a period of time when he was using like federal marshals to put down protests in Oregon, Portland, stuff like that. So that whole issue of posse comitatus and like you said, the habeas corpus, it is kind of getting blurred nowadays. At least it's possible to be blurred.
Well, they're still using police actions, right? Like federal marshals are still the police, and the FBI are still the police. When you actually have to call in the military, it's been done a couple of times in the States. It was done in Arkansas in the 50s to desegregate the schools, and it was also done during the LA riots in '92, which is still the basic legal model that they use in those cases. And they were very, for example, they ordered the Arkansas National Guard to barracks during the desegregation crisis, right? Which is, an odd thing to think that they didn't have faith in their own military from that state, right? That they would act in accordance with the instructions of the federal government. So, Trump never really understand law. I mean, not to be like, I don't mean to be insulting, but like he did not really understand the fine grain of those things, and he really didn't care what laws he violated, whereas most presidents would absolutely be obsessed with such questions, right? So now he didn't, like, there was also strange overlaps in a lot of things during the Trump years. Like, for example, you had people from the prisons showing up to police riots, right? Which is really troubling, like very, very troubling on a number of levels. But yeah, like the Trump years were kind of like those are very much like quasi-legal actions that simply never got accounted for, as you can see by like what we're seeing with the January 6th riots, where it's really like that was all illegal too, but is anyone actually going to be arrested for it? I mean, other than people on the street, like are the people who organize this thing actually going to be arrested for it? Probably not. It looks like.
Right. Okay. So then, are you seeing the same thing that I'm seeing? That it appears that there was complicity within the Capitol Police and other branches of government in January 6th?
between the Capitol Police?
Yeah.
No, I don't see. No, I have not. But like my reading of January 6th is pretty basic. Like there was a riot and the Capitol Police tried to stop it.
Gotcha.
But that's like where that. I mean, the January 6th hearings are pretty revelatory of these connections. I mean, the thing you have to remember about January 6th, like from my point of view, as someone who has been researching the far right for a long time, is that it was extremely disorganized for them. Like I think it was not planned like it was not particularly well organized. So it was absolutely not an instance where you can see a lot of organization of any kind. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not like there's like a lot of systems behind this. It's like there's just people reacting really to events on the ground in a very slapdash way.
What do you make of that?
And I mean that both sides.
Yeah. What do you make of that 9-page Proud Boy plans on how to enter the buildings and stuff like that? Because I published that, and a lot of people are complaining, saying, "Oh, Ed, you fell for this big FBI plot to, you know what I mean? False flag kind of operation. I fell for it. You know, what do you make of that 9-page plan?"
Well, they have a lot of plans, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, like, you know, these groups have, like, they sit around and come up with plans, right? That doesn't mean they're going to happen. And it doesn't mean that they even think they're going to happen. But yeah, I mean, obviously we're in a condition where large, you know, groups, right-wing groups have, beyond question, tried to do things like kidnap the governor of Michigan, right? Like they've entered and desecrated the legislature in Oregon as well. So, you know, there's definitely planning from the right. I just think, like, to me, when I see January 6th, what I see is kind of the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, like as in it's the small one before the big one, right? Like it was kind of a dress rehearsal before there's a large assault on the U.S. government, because the anti-government patriot movement is growing. It's getting stronger. It's definitely been amplified by the Trump years, and it has a lot of and it's infiltrated a lot of institutions, right? I mean, the Oath Keepers list with 40,000 names. There's a lot of names in state senators, police departments, you know, low-level electoral officials. So, yeah, I mean, you're dealing with people who are both organizing but not quite ready. I mean, the Proud Boys are not particularly, to me, the scariest group. But then they shatter and reform all the time. As for false flags, I mean, I don't really think there are many false flags. I kind of think that's I don't think that's something that happens. Like I think there are, like, I think groups do these things. There's certainly enough groups out there to make these things happen on their own. I mean, there are instances where people, like, spray paint their own synagogues and things like this, or you know, there was a Trump group that vandalized, and I think there was an anti-abortion clinic that vandalized its own thing. But it tends to be at that level. It doesn't tend to be violent. It tends to be more, you know, news items. But also, those are quite rare too. There's quite a large amount of political violence in the United States. Like much more than is reported in the news, like that makes big stories. And so, you know, it's pretty consistent in what happens in these things.
You mentioned that you weren't most concerned about the Proud Boys. Then who does concern you the most?
Oath Keepers.
Oath Keepers? Okay.
Oath Keeper. Well, I mean, there's a lot of people to be worried about. I mean, like, certainly the ones that upset me the most are probably the Nazis with law degrees. I mean, like, those are the ones where, you know, you talk to these guys and they're absolutely white power people. They believe in that only white people count, really. And you ask them, like, so how are you going to make your ethno-white state in the Northwest? And they say things like, oh, well, we'll base the Constitution on Japan's or Israel's, right? Like, they have brains in their heads. They don't have "Born to Lose" tattooed on their forehead and a swastika over their heart. They're like, you know, they're much more professional. And I remember talking to Michael German, who's an FBI agent who went undercover in in white power movements in the 2000s, and he said that when they found out that he had no tattoos, groups would immediately take him aside and say, like, you're going to leave all your Nazi biker friends behind. We're going to run you for a school board, and that's how we're going to enter. And we're going to enter power. Like, you're not going to talk to those guys anymore ever again. We have better plans. We have better things to do with you. And so those are really, that's what I fear, right? And like, you know, the reason those guys are so scary is like, when you want to go against domestic terrorism in the United States, the biggest problem the Department of Justice faces is that they cannot send watch lists to the police departments. And watch lists are easily the most effective way to combat terrorism, where you just send lists of names to police departments and other, you know, border patrol and things like that, and they essentially watch for these people. But they can't do that with domestic terrorists because the police departments get these lists and they just tip off their friends who are in these movements, right? And so that's where you have that connection between insurgents and, you know, like, you know, from an outsider, that's what they are. They're insurgents, and power, like institutional power and legislative power, like, you know, elected officials, police departments, and far-right insurgents. That's really frightening, right? Like, that's where these things become much harder to control, right? And also much harder to fight, right? And, you know, those far-right movements have absolutely succeeded in mainstreaming themselves in that way since about 2008.
Yeah, they seem to have total control over the gun stores too. As well. You know, they seem to have infiltrated that whole movement as well. But real backing up a minute here, Stephen Marche.
Sure.
Now you're from Canada.
Yeah.
Are you in?
I'm in Canada right now.
You're in Canada. Okay. Have you ever lived in the United States? Okay.
United States. I mean, I'm a Canadian, so like I have family. You know, I have my Trump voting cousin in Seattle. I've lived in the United States. I've worked for. I mean, I was a columnist at Esquire for 8 years, so I've worked mostly for Americans my whole life, right? It's kind of, when you're a Canadian, you kind of have that insider-outsider perspective.
Yeah.
You're like you're in Vegas, right?
Oh, no, not anymore. No, I left Vegas. I'm down wait, dude, I'm down in Florida now, man. I'm seeing a real culture shock.
It's the phone number. The phone number.
I just left Vegas. I left Vegas 3 years ago. Yeah, 3 years ago I left Vegas.
Well, Florida, I mean, Florida I've been in every winter of my life for 15 years before COVID, right? Like, and, you know, like, and yeah, it's intimate. Like, I feel like I'm familiar with America,
sure.
And yet we're not Americans, right? Like, we don't have the same problems. We don't have anywhere remotely the same government. Like, we don't have the same attitude towards government. And we also have, like, you know, also America's not my homeland, right? It's not like, I feel like I do love America very much, but it's not my mother. Like, Canada's my mother.
Well, don't forget, you guys have manners up there too that we haven't quite.
Well, we have pretend manners.
Really?
Americans are a lot nicer. Oh yeah, it's all fake.
Really?
It's all like, yeah. I mean, Americans are much nicer and more generous and sweeter. We just say sorry more. It's a trick. It's like it's just a trick we play.
Now, how long have you been noticing this schism here in the States, that this divide is growing and getting more hostile and more dangerous?
Well, I was sent by a Canadian magazine to cover the 2016 inauguration, the Trump inauguration, and you know, like, it was so. I mean, streets there. You know, at one point, like, there were large groups of left and right, quite near violence. People were lighting fires on the street. It really had a kind of fall of Rome vibe. Like, it had there was a sense, like, I was freaking out, and I went and got cigarettes at one point, and then I came back, and the people I was with had all been arrested. You know, I was standing on a limousine at one point to take photographs. I get down, the limousine's on fire. Like, you know, it definitely felt like something's up here. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go and see how bad it is. And I'm going to go and see how deep the problem runs. And basically, that was the book.
But how many years have you been noticing this?
Well, I would say the first time I went to a Trump rally. Like I went for the Guardian. For the Guardian, I went down and I covered Trump and Sanders had rallies within 3 days of each other in Iowa. And so I went down and saw a Trump rally and a Sanders rally, and I was like, okay, something's off here. Like something's going wrong here. And I think the Obama years really gave us a sense of like, well, they're bad in America, but like at least there's somebody sensible in power. And then when that felt like, as that started to fall apart, the short answer is I noticed it when everybody else noticed it.
Yeah.
Like it's not like I had some massive insight. Now, the experts that I talked to, the people in who work with who study far right groups and who study political violence in the United States, they would say that it started in 2008, and that was when things like Texas secession really started becoming more mainstream, whereas before it had been really freak events. And they mostly date it from the housing crisis and Obama's election. And also, I would add the surge in Iraq, where essentially you have this confluence of factors where the old myths of America really start to fall apart pretty fiercely, pretty quickly, and then from that you chaos spread.
What do you mean? Yeah, I would agree with you. Obama seemed to be like a real hair trigger. It was like a trigger. I wonder why. But it seems to be.
It's not exactly. That's not exactly. It's not exactly. But it's also like to me. It's like the housing crisis is the big one.
Yeah.
The housing crisis is like class equity just dissolves, right? Like the middle class dream of America, which is like the next generation is going to do better than the one before. That starts to fall apart. You have the replacement of white iconography with multicultural iconography, which freaks out, a huge chunk of the white population of the United States. These things happen at the same time, but to me, it's more. The experts tend to date it from the housing crisis, but obviously it's both, right? Obviously. Yeah. I think.
Now, when we look at the two factions here, right, the extreme right, like you said, who seem to be motivated, again, there seems to be like a racial motivation, and but on the left, is it the extreme right against the extreme left, or is it just the extreme right against the average Democrat?
Well, the extreme left tendency to dissolve on contact. Like, it eats itself very quickly.
Right.
Like, one of the things, I remember a conversation I had with an FBI agent where I was like, well, what? Because, the vast majority of the violence is right-wing. There are incidents of left-wing political violence, but it's pretty small when you look at, like, political murders on a whole. Like, it's well over 70% are from the right wing. Then you have a few that are Islamic terrorists. Then you've got, I think the number is 4% are left-wing violence in the United States. And I asked an FBI agent about this. I was like, why are, like, I know some angry left people, like, is it that the right's angrier? And he's like, well, not really. It's because the left tends to destroy their own institutions before they can get to the point of doing anything, which is kind of an amazing thing to say, right? Like, the left, falls into factionalism and the circular firing squad pretty quickly, and so you can see that even in the Democratic wing, where they're all fighting over, really they're fighting amongst themselves, even as the country loses its democracy, right? And they just cannot stop the squabbling. So, yeah, the reason the right has much more solidarity than the left. Right, and that's one of the reasons it's more effective. It's just so much more effective.
Yeah, they seem to be a lot angrier too.
There's a huge amount of anger. Like, yeah. I wouldn't underrate the anger on the left. Like, the left wing people are quite angry, and the right wing people are angry too. Everyone in America feels under siege. Like, I didn't talk to anyone on any side of this who does not feel like their hopes for their country are about to be overwhelmed by the other side, right? Like, no one feels like they're winning, right? Like, it's not like the people on the right feel like, well, we're putting it to them by this. Like, that's not how they feel at all. They feel like they're just about to lose everything. So you have that, but I think also the right does have a much more advanced conception of the decline of institutions. Like they don't believe in government at all, and they think it should just be destroyed. And they also have a higher tolerance for violence, right? Like they are much more like civil rights fantasies. Like this book that I'm writing, where I imagine the Civil War, like there are plenty of books on the far right that imagine the Civil War. Right, like that's like a whole genre. I mean, it's mostly fantasy fiction, but they definitely have like if you go on talk radio, American talk radio, they've been talking about the possibility of civil war for 10 years, right? It's absolutely a normal thing for them to talk about. So, that's also a major difference between the left and the right. Although I think the left is actually catching up pretty quickly. Like, the Washington Post ran a piece a little while back with, like, when Texas brought up secession in their Republican convention, and there was a piece in the Washington Post saying, "Texas, please go." I actually think it would have been more or less impossible for that piece to appear even a year ago. Like, I think the appetite on the left for disunion and division is actually increasing pretty dramatically.
It seems also too that on the right that they have this fascination with pissing off the libs, trolling the libs, owning the libs. Like there's this. There's a the term for it that some experts use is complementary radicalization. Mm-hmm. So what happens is, like, you have extreme positions on the left create this reaction on the right, which are extreme and angry and like, how ridiculous are these people, and then that creates extreme reactions on the left, which then feeds reactions on the right. So Boys is the ultimate example of that. I mean, that movement started by a journalist who founded Vice magazine. Yeah. Right. Like it's an ironic detachment, anti-system, essentially aesthetic, like that it simply took on a political form. But the loathing has become its own purpose. But that to me is really what happens when you have a government system that can't enact political will. It just becomes this name calling, right? And the thing you have to remember about the United States is that its government right now is basically dysfunctional fundamentally, and that's not really either party's fault. Like it's this antiquated system that really doesn't reflect the popular will at all. And so when you have a sense that your government doesn't reflect the popular will, there's not a lot more you can do except call each other names and scream at each other. And so that's what American politics devolves into. It seems also, too, that on the right, that they create this fictional leftist, you know what I mean, with these wild, extreme views that wants to, take away all their cows and their ice cream. You know what I mean? Yeah. And well, isn't that just the most ridiculous thing in the world? It just seems like there's so much effort going into that. Do you see that as organic, or is there some kind of manipulation going on there of these folks?
I wouldn't say, I don't think it's manipulation. I mean, like, one of the things that I did learn going to these places and talking to these people is, like, people blame the NRA for things, but the NRA is only responding to the will of its members. Like, the NRA is actually not anywhere near as radical as, like, when you go to, like, a major gun show in Oklahoma or something like that, like, their Second Amendment absolutism is far more intense than what the NRA promotes, right? Yeah. So, like, it's definitely coming from the ground. Like, I don't think this is not some kind of manipulation system, because, frankly, like, when I look at America, I don't see anyone in control, right? Like, I don't see anyone able to control anything. That's why an agent of chaos like Trump can triumph, right? Like, I don't think it's organic, but on the other hand, like, it's created by certain specific factors, right? I mean, it's created, like, one of the things is that, white people in the United States are about to become a majority minority. Like, it's about to become a majority minority country where by 2040, less than half the country will be white. Whenever that happens, wherever that happens, like in India, for instance, like, they can actually chart political violence when Muslims gain spending power as opposed to Hindus. Muslims are the out group in India, and Hindus are the dominant group. Like when they gain as opposed to the overpowering group, that's when violence starts. And so, it's really depressing. Like, you want to talk about a depressing fact, but like, violence isn't started by underclasses rising up over people who are oppressing them. It actually starts when people who are lose it and feel themselves losing their dominance. And that's not a phenomenon like unique to America. Like, it's not one that you see in you also see it in India, you see it all over Africa. Like, that's where political violence starts, often in rural areas in Nigeria, for instance. So that's a phenomenon that is well known. So there's that is one cause of it. Another cause is I think you can't really underrate the sense of political impotence that U.S. government provides, right? Like, the sense that no one can enact policy. Like, you can't. Your vote really doesn't count. And 5 out of 9 of the Supreme Court justices were selected by presidents who did not win the popular mandate, right? So their decisions are not popular will. They're just not reflective of the American people's desire for their country. And when that happens, you kind of, when you lose the law, when you lose the sense that the law is providing justice, you've lost everything in a way, right? That's the basis of, everything else. And once that's lost, then that's when you get this cultural war nonsense, right? Like, that's where and the cultural war nonsense, like, some of the stats about it are really incredible. Like, the number of people who shared information that they knew to be false in the 2016 election. I think it was 22%. Maybe it was 4. I don't have the number. But it was a significant number of people who are deliberately sharing information they know to be false because it's their own side's information. Once you stop having respect for the truth, even in your own private, you're going to get nonsense. You're going to get political nonsense, which it's where the United States finds itself.
It seems like, especially in the past 20 years or so, we've lost all faith in all institutions, even the church. We had a pope resign in my lifetime. This is just so rare. Anyway, listen, we got to take a commercial break.
Churches,
Go ahead.
Okay.
No, go ahead.
Well, it is that is the root cause of all this stuff, like this decline of trust. And it is across institutions. So it's the police, it's the courts, it's the Congress, it's the Supreme Court, but it's churches, it's the media, it's everything, right? And when you're in a low trust environment, a lot of horrible things become very possible very quickly.
Now, I've had these notes up here for a while. I've been wanting to hit you with it. The thing is, I'm way to the left. Okay, I'm far to the left, and I grew up with the yippies back in Manhattan, in New York City. I was a local street anarchist. Okay, in my teens, in the 70s. I'm a left guy.
Actual yippies or
yes, man, yes, yippie headquarters on 9 Bleecker Street. That was me.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Amazing.
I know, man. I know. Now, so I was an anarchist. I'm a socialist today. But the thing is, now when we talk about these right-wing extremists, we know who we're talking about. But it seems like the other side of that coin that is, are basically Democrats. It's really not the left. They're both of them are capitalists. So what is the big beef between these two groups of capitalists when they're basically being owned by the same people? Like, what, I don't see a far left in this country anymore.
Oh no, no. Speaking from a country with actual socialism in it,
right.
Even when people talk, even when Bernie Sanders says socialism, he's not talking about socialism. He's talking about a state, having a government that does things, right? The United States is really the state does almost nothing, in terms of its functions in the world. But what you're talking about between the Democrats and Republicans is here's how I would describe it. So you have right-wing people, the right-wing movement that has been sort of overtaken, I would say, by anti-government patriots. So those are people who, and that's a broad term, but it does embrace a large group of people, from accelerationists and Nazis all the way to oath keepers who are are not really as nakedly violent as they are. But they believe that their hatred of the government is their form of the love for their country, right? This creates an enormous contradiction when these people enter government itself, right? The contradiction of someone like Josh Hawley, who's like literally raising a fist in support of a mob that then comes to attack him, right? And why you have things like Republicans not like the one thing. I mean, it shocked even me. Like, I'm not really shockable at this point, but like the fact that the Republicans did not show up to give a minute of silence to the security guard who died on January 6th. I mean, that's astonishing. Like, to not give a moment of respect for somebody who literally gave his life for your personal security and your physical bodily security, that's an astonishing level of partisanship. But so you have people who really want institutions to fall apart. Like, that's the Republican Party wants these institutions to fall apart. On the other hand, you have these Democrats, the ones who are in power, the ones that matter, like Nancy Pelosi, Joe Biden, Chuck Schumer, et cetera. They are very old, and they really believe that they are trying to preserve these institutions, and that somehow they will figure out a way. The Republicans will come to their senses, and the U.S. Senate will be what it was in 1985. And they're just desperately trying to keep the institutions functional, basically functional, right? They're increasingly losing that struggle. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, the left in the United States is the only place that it exists, and the only place that it's going to exist, incidentally, in the future is on the state level, right? Like like what's going to happen is that if you're an activist in the United States and you want to make positive change, and you want, like Canada, for instance, just passed $10 a day daycare, right? Like, everyone in this country drops their kid off at daycare. There's going to be a government daycare where your kid can be taken care of for the day for $10, right? That's a huge progressive achievement, right? That's going to affect the lives of women across this country enormously. It's going to affect poor people's lives enormously. It's going to increase our access to the workforce for people of all immigrants and so on. Like, and it's going to build the social fabric in a hugely important way. That's not conceivable in the federal government as it currently exists, in the political system of the United States as it currently exists. But it might be possible in New York State or California, right? And it might be possible in Illinois even, right? And so I think, like, what we're going to see is left-wing politics, progressive politics. Let's not even call it socialism. Like, let's not even call it the overturning of, because that's, so far gone as a possibility. Meaningful progressive change, government through policy, that's only going to happen on the state level. The federal government is just going to dissolve policy. I mean, when you look at the Dobbs decision, like, what that created was not institutional clarity. It created huge amounts of chaos all around the country, and that chaos is going to last for a long time, right? That's not. There's going to be fights about what this means for probably 30, 40 years, right? So, yeah, like, I don't see any left-wing politics in the United States except for a marginal group that is mostly rhetorical. Like, in my own country, there are active left-wing politicians who make policies and make progressive change. I don't see that anywhere in the United States. What I see is radical groups on the left and right who are mostly rhetorical. Then you have a Republican Party that is dismantling government institutions, and a Democratic, party that is desperately trying to preserve them and failing, and failing to preserve them adequately. So, yeah, actual left-wing politics, that's gone. Yeah. I don't see it at all.
Thanks. Now, and then what we have here too is an increasingly armed right wing, uneducated right wing. And historically, the reaction to inflation, hyperinflation, has been fascism. What do you see if the left, what the left there is, are advocating disarming themselves actively? What are you looking at here? We're looking at a situation with this. It's the writing's on the wall.
Well, I mean, I would also say like the number one in groups that increased weapons purchases in 2019 and 2020, African Americans and women. Right now, some people say that's because the white male gun is saturated. Like they literally just can't buy any more guns. But you know, black women are arming themselves. Absolutely, they are. Right, and I think one of the reasons for that is they sense breakdown. Yeah. Right, like they that's something that they think about. Right, and so. But also, you know, it's important to remember that even with the massive amounts of armaments in the United States, I'm like, you know, I hear about people with tanks, and certainly I've met people with flamethrowers, and like definitely, you know, hand grenades are not really that impressive to me at this point. Like I've met a lot of people who own these things. Like that is nothing compared to the U.S. military, right? Yeah. Like the Marines are the Marines. Like in terms of actual insurgent conflict, like, you know, the military is the military, and all these militias who think they're so tough, I mean, you know, they're all overweight, middle-aged guys. Like they're not, you know, they're not really a threat to U.S. force. But you know, not that that's really the point, because the violence feeds on itself, even if it's under control. But yeah, I mean, I think the left is starting to arm itself. Like that's a phenomenon. Like that is really happening. So I mean, I think, as I said, you know, in the first half of the show, like as the left is starting to gain consciousness that the political system is not particularly stable. The right has known that for a long time, but I think the left is starting to figure it out.
We only got about 5 minutes left. Time's just flown. Do you have any encouraging news? Is there any way that we can avoid extreme polarization and potential violence?
Look, you guys are America. Like, you are the country of reinvention, of personal reinvention, of political reinvention. You've remade yourselves many times. This is another time you're going to have to reinvent yourself. Like, that's my... I don't know if it's a hopeful message. It's more like a pep talk. Like, it's like, you know, like your Constitution is 240 years old. The problems that you face are structural. They're not going to be solved by electing somebody, like, or, you know, go and vote them out or whatever. That's not going to solve this problem. Like, real structural changes are required to think, to reimagine America from the ground up. But if there is any country that can do it, it's you. Right? I mean, if there's any place that can reinvent itself, it's the United States of America. But you're going to have to do that. Like,
maybe I should move. I should move there to that kind of optimism, my friend.
We have our own problems. Like, you have to remember. Like, Canada nearly broke up twice in my lifetime. Right? Yeah. Like once in Quebec nearly separated once in '82 and '95. Like we've been on. I mean, it's amazingly weird to me to be talking to an American about their political instability when for most of my life, like Canada's been about to crumble and America's been the bedrock of the world, right? And of the whole world order, right? And so country, like there are 3 times as many countries today as there were in 1945. Like, countries require reinvention. They require figuring out who they are. No political form lasts forever, right? France is in its 5th republic, right, since 1789, right? I mean, what America really needs is a second republic, like, and maybe it looks different than the one it currently has, but it's still America, you know. I mean, it still is a very beautiful, open place that has so much going for it, right? Like, this political disorder is really only a part of this equation.
Yeah, I guess you're right. We have the beaches, right? Because the way I see it,
you have the farmland.
You're right. We have farmland too.
Cities.
But
you have New York City, man.
Yeah.
Like you have Hollywood. You have Silicon Valley. I mean, if Texas separated, it would be the 8th largest economy in the world.
California as well. Yeah.
If California were its own country, it would be the 5th largest economy in the world, but it would be 20,000 per person GDP richer than the next country. Like, that's how rich California is, right? The difference is like 50,000 to 70,000 per person GDP. I mean, the people of California would be a lot richer than the next richest people in the world. So, what we're seeing here is political disorder and disunion. But I do really believe in the people of America. Like they have come up with answers to their own struggles before, and I pray they will again.
So then, Stephen Marche, when I see that this political disorder, but I believe is by design, by exploitive capitalists in order to divide us and manipulate all of us, but you see it as an organic, a natural progression?
I never saw anyone controlling anything.
Gotcha.
What I see is order slipping away. Like it's extraordinary when you talk to people in power how powerless they feel.
So true,
right? And like I remember talking to one MP from England who was like, he'd been a cabinet minister, he'd been at senior levels of government, and I was talking to him at the end of it. He said, the only thing I ever did with my life is I put an elevator in my local subway. He said, if you were to tote up like what I achieved in my life, like that would be it. Right, like the rest of it's just a bunch of meetings, right? And I don't see obviously there are extremely negative forces in the United States that are on a corporate level that don't require conspiracy theories to understand. The prison system, for instance, right, like which is a completely insane way of dealing with human beings, and also the guns that. Right, but that's not. There's no guy on top thinking it all through. It's just a bunch of chaos. It's just a bunch of atoms hitting off each other. I mean, I think that's probably more depressing than the idea that there is some plan to divide us. I think the division comes naturally, especially in America, which is such a big country and has so much difference in it to begin with. Right. So, yeah, I don't see any order.
Stephen Marche, I wish we had another couple hours. I really do. I can't thank you enough for coming on the show.
I'd probably just depress you more.
Well, I was depressed before we started. It kind of, in some ways, it cheered me up. Especially when we got the audio better. That really cheered me up. Right. StephenMarche.com, MarChe.com. You can find him on Twitter, Stephen Marche. This book is called The Next Civil War, Dispatches from the American Future. But many, many books. This one about, like I mentioned before, about Shakespeare. Looks like all good stuff, but there's something about making your bed. I guess it's that thing from the guy from the military, to make your bed every day. The unmade bed, the hunger of the wolf. Great stuff from Stephen Marche. I'm going to be keeping my eye on you, my friend. Thank you so much.
Please do. Yeah, great to talk to you.
Good night.
Goodbye.